Well, hey, you want to see the dumbest kickoff in the history of the NFL? All right. New Year's Day 2017, Bills at Jets. Referee Jeff Triplett emerges from the pile, and he is so happy. He's such a happy man, and you know why? He's calling a play that, as far as I can tell, has never happened before in the NFL. So to back up, this is Mike Gillislee, who's returned exactly one NFL kick in his entire life. The ball went over his head, so he keeps his hands off and lets it just roll into the end zone, which is what you're supposed to do with a punt. But of course, this is not a punt. It's a kick, which means that it's a live ball to which both teams have equal right. His nearest teammate, Brandon Tate, has fielded hundreds of kicks, and if he had the time, he'd probably say something like, "Mike, listen, you need to fall on that ball. If you don't, they are going to score a touchdown." But he only has like half a second, so he just goes like, "No, bad." But it's too late. The Jets' Doug Middleton falls on the ball for what goes down in the books as a kickoff recovery touchdown. That vocabulary has never been used in any other NFL box score, ever. The play-by-play account seems to be at a complete loss. It makes the kicker, Nick Folk, look like some kind of god. Nick Folk kicks off 65 yards. Touchdown. He's just out there kicking touchdowns. This play is dumb, but I don't mean this individual play. I mean kickoffs in general. They should be abolished, because kickoffs are stupid and bad. Let's begin with the coolest possible outcome for a kickoff, the kick return touchdown. These are cool, right? Well, if you stop and think about the coolest return TD you've ever seen, I bet you're thinking of a punt return. That's the fun one. My favorite NFL play of all time was a punt return. 2003, Broncos at Chiefs. This play is completely ludicrous. Dante Hall fields the punt and changes directions 5 times. He's also benefiting from 2 of his teammates blocking guys from behind, which is super illegal. By some miracle, the refs don't see either of them. Let's freeze it here. Dante Hall is running backwards 5 yards from his own end zone. This is supposed to end in disaster, but it doesn't. This 19-second odyssey features 8 missed tackles and ends with a game-winning touchdown. Punt returns are cool like that. Kick returns are not. This is a sample of the 30 kick return touchdowns between the 2013 and 2016 seasons. I studied the tape and I traced the route of the return man in each play. Originally, I wanted to see whether I could identify some kind of trend, some trick that made a return more successful. But honestly, the only advice I can give is to be Cordarrelle Patterson. He accounts for 5 of these 30 touchdowns all by himself. He seems to have a sixth sense sometimes. This one's pretty brilliant. Patterson gets past the first wave of tacklers. You'd expect him to keep running vertically, outrun this defender, and just sprint along the sideline. Instead, he swerves almost sideways, right into the teeth of the defense. I think this qualifies as some level of genius. The defender's momenta are carrying them one way. When Patterson goes the other way, there's no answer. He's gone. But most returns look kind of like this one. Here's Marquise Lee from 2016. He sees a hole, he runs through it. That's it. You want to talk scheme? Okay, here's the 2-man wedge. Here are 2 defenders coming up the side. Here's the 2 men coming over to block the 2 defenders. And that's what gives Lee his lane. It's not all that interesting. In almost all of these, there's no reversal of field. They don't even have to make anyone miss most of the time. There's no creativity, not a lot of technique. Most of the time, there's no real decision making. It's only exciting because of the 6 points waiting at the end of it, and the huge impact it can have on a football game. But inherently speaking, it's so boring. They found a way to make touchdowns boring. But see, kickoffs don't work like the rest of football does. Most of the sport is really complicated. Football is made up of a bunch of little machines, and each one is operated with lots of little dials and switches. And over the years, we've slowly learned how to use these machines in different ways. When they spit out data, they tell us all kinds of stories. Like this one, the pass machine. Passing touchdown rates were a little flat in the 70s until Coach Don Coryell introduced his Air Coryell offense, which emphasized deep routes and longer throws. It was really successful, a lot of teams picked it up, and passing TDs have been up ever since. Usually when these machines go up and down, we can understand why they do. Scoring dipped in the late 80s, and then the NFL introduced rule changes that protected the quarterback, and it's been on the rise ever since. The extra point machine tells us another story that makes sense. In 1974, the NFL moved the goalpost to the back of the end zone, and kickers missed a little more often. They inevitably got better over the years, and then the league moved the line of scrimmage back to the 15, and it's dropped again. The point being, all these systems evolve, and when they change, we can understand why they change. Not this one. This machine is busted. In 2016, the average kick return made it to the 22-yard line, which is almost exactly where it was nearly 50 years ago. To get a better understanding of the success rate of kick returns, I built a sample of almost every NFL kickoff return between 2011 and 2016. There were a few hundred I had to kick out because the play-by-play data was either incomplete or would take too much time to piece together. I still ended up with a sample of 15,598, including touchbacks. And here's how they all ended up, sorted from worst to best field position. As you'd guess, touchdowns almost never happen, about one time out of 300, but even a modest win for the return team is super rare. They only get past their own 40 about 2.5% of the time. The kicking team doesn't have much chance of a big win either. They only pin their opponent inside the 10 about 1% of the time. The vast majority of kicks, 76%, put the ball between the 20 and the 30. This is largely thanks to touchbacks, which make up about half of all kickoff results. The touchback automatically placed the ball at the 20 until 2016, when a rule change placed it at the 25. That's what these two plateaus are about. But whether you start with the ball at the 20 or 25 or 40 or 15, how much does it really matter? It does, of course, but not as much as I would have thought. I also looked at the drives that began with these kickoffs and calculated the points that resulted from them. Clearly, starting further up the field is generally better, but the benefits are inconsistent and frankly kind of small. So look, if you start a drive between the 40 and the 49, you'll score an average of 2.1 points from this drive, right? But if you start a little further back, you average a little more. Maybe this is a freak deviation, but both these figures represent a sample of at least 700 plays. Maybe that's still not large enough. Fact remains, the benefits of starting up here versus down there are not showing up on the scoreboard. It just doesn't seem right. If you start between the 40 and the 49, you score just barely more than you do if you start between the 25 and 29. Even if your field position is cut in half or worse, you're docked by less than 25%. So even if you pull off one of these super rare kick returns, you're only barely better off than if you just get to here, which is basically the easiest thing in the world to do. A good kick return just doesn't reward you nearly as much as it should. It's like winning $20 in Powerball. It's just bad game design. And I mean, we can usually forgive a little bit of bad game design, right? Football is about as old as a light bulb. It'd be reasonable to live with a little bit of suboptimal design for the sake of tradition. Except, the kickoff is the most dangerous play in an already dangerous sport. Kickoffs result in a concussion every 157 plays, as compared to 1 in 241 in all other NFL plays. Now, the league tried to curb this in 2016 when it brought the touchback line out from the 20 to the 25 in order to incentivize more touchbacks. It did that, but it didn't matter a lot because the assumption that touchbacks are safe isn't all that accurate. Here's a touchback I selected completely at random. You can see that when the blockers turn around to block, the return man hasn't caught the ball yet. They don't know whether it's going to be a touchback or not, so they have to play through. And for the most part, so does the opponent. They're flying in at full speed, and by the time the returner takes a knee, they've already made impact for the blockers. So even though the returner hasn't taken a step, the most dangerous part of the play has already happened. Touchbacks don't fix this. Matter of fact, I'd argue that nothing fixes this. The kickoff is too simple to fix. It's like trying to adjust an old coffee maker. Either it works or it doesn't, and it doesn't. So, to recap, the kickoff is boring. Even the touchdowns are boring. It's dangerous, as it leads all plays in concussion rates. The kickoff is so simple that there's very little room to get creative strategically. Unlike the rest of football, the kickoff rarely produces any winner of any kind, and it gives us more or less the same result most of the time. And even when a team does make a good return, the reward is far too small, if there even is a reward. That's my argument for the abolition of kickoffs. They are bad. But if we did get rid of the kickoff, there's something important that we need to account for. We'd lose the onside kick. The onside kick is important. It allows a team to cheat the system and keep the ball for an extra possession. It's not likely to be successful. If you run a surprise onside kick, the success rate is 25%, but if you run it when they're expecting it, which they usually do, it drops all the way to 5%. But it's still possible, and all that matters is that it's possible. Let's take this Cardinals-Saints game, which is like a lot of other games. The red represents the Cardinals' win probability after each play from 0% to 100%. After a few peaks and valleys, the Saints jump out to a 48-34 lead. To get back into the game, the Cardinals have to score 2 touchdowns in 3 minutes and change. If they don't have the onside kick at their disposal, there's no way they have time to do that. Their chances of winning would be virtually zero, and the last few minutes of the game would be boring and completely irrelevant, which from a fun gameplay perspective is bad. But the onside kick dangles just enough of a carrot to make the end of the game meaningful. When they do attempt it, it's unsuccessful, but it served its purpose. The mere potential of the onside kick kept the game at least kinda interesting. So yeah, the onside kick is important. The problem with it is that it is the ugliest play in sports. For starters, it doesn't make any intuitive sense. The idea is to kick the ball the required 10 yards, then somehow find a way to recover it. If this bore any semblance to base natural logic, the idea would be to just not kick it, but you have to, so you kick it intentionally badly, intentionally weakly, to expose a loophole in football's bureaucracy. If you watch the entire thing as a sort of singular collective gesture, it looks humiliating. And just like its big sibling, the conventional kickoff, there's very little skill involved. If footballs were round, onside kicks would never be recovered. Their pointed oblong shape, the very same quality that makes them cut through the air and gives order to the passing game, throws it into absolute chaos once it hits the ground. It's impossible to judge on the fly which way a football is going to bounce. It's a total game of chance, and it's impossible to look dignified while playing it. See, this play was forged in the fires of hell. You know how I know that? Because around the turn of the 20th century, there was serious debate as to what was more effective as an offensive weapon, the forward pass or the onside kick. I'm going to restate that because I need to make sure you're bearing witness to this with me. At least some football writers and coaches genuinely believed that onside kicking the ball was a better way to gain yards than passing it. Unbelievably, a few teams could actually make this work several times in a row and just onside kick themselves down the field. And this was possible because in its early days, football was the worst sport in the world. Over the years, the onside kick was phased out of the offensive game and is now mostly used only in cases of desperation. But it's still here. The NFL's rulebook actually reminds me of something I use every day, the New York City subway system. It's monstrous and ancient. Over the last 100 years or so, it's gradually expanded to form a giant, messy, asymmetric patchwork of tacked-on ideas that sometimes don't make any sense. Why are the NFL's overtime rules so bad? That's just the way it is. Why doesn't the M train go a little further to make a complete loop? That's just the way it is. Like this subway system, the NFL adds and adjusts, but it rarely subtracts. It just leaves this grotesque array of appendices all over itself, and the kickoff is the most hideous of them all. In other words, the kickoff is Chambers Street. Y'all been to the Chambers Street station, right? Oh, you haven't? Okay, you know what? Field trip. I'm calling a field trip. This is a chart party field trip. The New York City subway system has 472 stations, and if you ask me, Chambers Street is the ugliest one. I roll through it every day on the way to work, so I figured that today I'd make a stop. It was built in 1915. In 1931, they made adjustments to the station that rendered this side platform unnecessary, so they locked it up and they never touched it again. For 86 years and counting, it's just sat there, in full view of commuters standing a dozen feet away, crumbling. It's right out of a horror film. Why have they allowed a station right outside City Hall to turn into this? How could they possibly build a structure, use it for 16 years, and then let it decompose in public view for nearly a century? Couldn't they just clean it up a little bit, or wall it off, or knock it down, or find some other use for it? Nope. It has to sit here and rot. That's just the way it is. It's a stupid, inseparable part of the system. That's Chambers Street. And that's the kickoff. Well, hey everybody, we got a fax. This is a proposal submitted a few years ago by Coach Greg Schiano. Years ago, while coaching at Rutgers, Schiano watched one of his players, Eric LeGrand, suffer an injury on a kickoff that left him permanently paralyzed. So he came up with a solution to replace the kickoff. Instead of kicking off, the team in question gets the ball at its own 30. The catch is that they don't get 1st and 10. They're put automatically at 4th and 15. Now, what they'll probably choose to do at this point is punt, which is good because a punt return is more interesting than a kick return. It's also far safer. Instead of starting all the way across the field and slamming into each other at full speed, they line up at scrimmage. Like you do in actual football. The genius of this, though, is that it also provides a far superior replacement of the onside kick. If they want to catch their opponent off guard, they can run a fake punt. And if they're up against the wall, they can trot their quarterback out there and just straight up go for it. Historically, teams have about a 22% chance of converting a 4th and 15, so it's kind of a long shot, but it's still far more likely to succeed than the planned onside kick, which I think is cool. As an added bonus, it's actual football that's interesting to watch instead of the ugliest, stupidest looking spectacle in organized sports in which dice is played with human bodies. The only suggestion I might make is to maybe give them 4th and 10 instead of 4th and 15. That way, the odds of conversion rise to about 31%. I like this because I prefer chaos, but aside from that, I love this plan. It's simple, obvious, less dangerous, and more fun. So would the NFL ever adopt this rule? It makes all the sense in the world. So no,